ADD, ADHD, whatever, these things are like sort of a spectrum. It's not like you sort of get to some point and like, oh, you have it, and like, oh, these person don't have it. Like, it's not that black and white. I think there's like sort of a spectrum. And frankly, I think that latter population of people who are like laser focused all the time is just like kind of disintegrating with the way that, you know, phones are and like the amount of dopamine people have in their lives these days. Like, it's really hard to like have that like laser focused attention all the time.
Jake, you were the head coach of a JV high school basketball team.
That's right.
How many quotes from the movie Coach Carter did you memorize to say at practice? Because I would have just had a clipboard just screaming out like, you got to pay 50 free throws to leave this gym, boy. Where do you think you're going?
Yeah, I didn't, that's pretty good actually. It sounded like we're doing the audio only. I thought you like threw on a movie clip there. Something I've gotten sort of benefit from is you do something once and you're much more likely to continue it. But if you think about it as starting a new habit or starting to do something with the intention of doing it more, you're much less likely to do it. Like, what I should really do is be like, I'm going to record one rap song this week. Like, I don't care about anything. There's no excuses. Like, I'm going to do it. And then like, if I actually, stand by that and say that to myself and actually am of my word and do it, then like I can leave it at that. But most likely I will record more.
Jake, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, man, it's good to be here.
Good to be back in the same chat room. We were chatting before we started recording, and we were talking about the benefits of recording audio versus video, because I'm not sure how you will appear yet in my post-production for this podcast, but in your podcast, you record audio only on Zoom, you were saying, and then you have an avatar that is the representation of you that syncs up with your voice. And I had a couple conversations recently with friends where it was just, I had my AirPods in, I'm chilling in my apartment, I'm wearing underwear, I'm drinking whiskey, I'm not giving a fuck about what I look like. And it was just such a magical string of conversations, just catching up with a few different people over the course of a couple of days. We just didn't do FaceTime for whatever reason. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you like about the audio only versus video?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of audio only. There's a bunch of reasons. Let me see if I could sort of organize my thoughts a little bit. But one, just sort of hearing what you were just saying, you're able to hang around your apartment, don't care what you look like, drinking whiskey, don't have a shirt on, whatever. The freedom to look however you want to look, whenever you want to look that way is pretty nice, and not having to worry about anything in that department. Secondarily, you can go for a walk. You can't go for a walk really on video. At least it's not really going to be good. So I like to, almost all of my phone calls, for example, I do while I'm walking, and it's just like a great way to get some casual exercise. I think that walking and talking is sort of like a specific, sort of like a specific category within like the audio only conversation category. And I think walking and talking in particular is great because I don't know, like the exact science or anything like that, or that there even is science, but my guess is that there's something to this concept of like increasing your heart rate a little bit and like your blood flow and just sort of being in motion, like occupying your physical body, enables sort of better thinking, better speaking, better listening, all of that, everything that you would want in a conversation, better ability to focus because your body is sort of like occupied, like you're not gonna be like fidgeting because you're just like sort of doing a consistent walk. So I find that my conversations on the move generally are better than conversations stationary. Right now I'm sitting at my desk, so hopefully this conversation turns out decent. But I just think it's a little bit better. It tends to be a little bit better, sort of like on the walk, and you can't really do that with video. And then for even when I'm like, in a stationary, like forget the movement and all that, just at my desk or whatever, I think that with COVID and everything, people like defaulted to doing these like Zooms all the time or video conferences, Google Meets, whatever. And prior to that, people did a lot of like meeting in person, obviously. And there was kind of like meeting in person, and then there was like phone calls or like even like, conference calls, if people remember those. They're not really like as much of a thing anymore. And, yeah, people did like video chats like once in a while, but they really weren't popular. And it's kind of hard to remember, but this is only like 5 years ago or whatever. And then we just sort of like flipped the switch. We're like, well, we can't really do in person meetings anymore. So for that moment in time, so we're going to flip to doing all of these, Zoom calls as a replacement. And then also we're going to drag our previous phone calls into the mix and turn those into video calls too, for like no real good, well thought out reason, I don't
Yeah.
think. And so we just ended up doing all these video chats. And I fortunately was like never really in this position, but I hear of all these people who are like in Zoom chats for, hours and hours a day. And just like your job performance becomes evaluated on how good you are at like sitting still and like looking at this little camera on your computer instead of like actually being a productive employee or, worker or whatever it is. Like the person who, can't sit still and needs to like, pace around or fidget in their seat all the time or can't keep eye contact with this stupid little camera is going to be like, to their detriment, sort of valued or like judged as like a, sort of a worse member of the team, which just like makes no sense to me. It's like just valuing like the totally wrong things. And anyway, I'm
Yeah.
probably one of those people. Like I like to like sort of pace around. I don't like to like look at one spot. It's actually like very distracting for me to like keep my eyes fixed on like the one person speaking. Like I'd rather just be able to listen, and like sometimes to listen better, I need to like, not look at the person speaking, just like listen to the words. Um, and like walking around helps and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm pretty biased, but I think that like video, because of sort of my personal preferences, but I think that video is just like very distracting. Like it's audio plus a bunch of stuff that's not really necessary, like a cat in your background or, you know, kids walking around in the kitchen or like whatever it is. It's just like all distractions. Someone's got like, their hair is like standing up weird or something. It's like all these distractions that I think if you just cut that all out and you can just focus solely on the audio, like what we're doing now, basically, it's just way easier for me to listen. So I think that leads to a better conversation.
Did you see the Shark Tank video about the just recording yourself sitting on a conference call? That it was an app that went viral on Shark Tank, where this guy basically created a platform where you could record yourself sitting for hours and hours, and it would just loop. And so I don't know exactly the technicality of how it works, but I'm assuming you sit in front of a camera for, let's say, 20 minutes or so, and you just kind of nod and act like you're paying attention. Maybe you throw in like, oh yeah, no, we'll circle back on that, or just like just like corporate vocabulary that you can just throw it, and a lot of it is sound off, so a lot of it's just based on like body language and eye contact. But this guy made an app where it just loops you sitting in front of a camera, and then you can sync it to your Zoom schedule somehow, and then your loop will then sit in the meeting. And those meetings, what you're talking about, where it's just 40 people on a conference call and you're all muted anyway, and you're just listening to someone talk for 2.5 hours. This is perfect for you just looping yourself and
Yeah.
then putting yourself into a meeting. And then I could be doing it right now and recording a podcast, and then there's a looped version of me just floating in the cloud somewhere on Zoom that some, CFO thinks that he's been talking to for the last 2 hours. So that what you were saying just reminded me of this culture of just sitting still and being judged by how well you just it's almost like people are judged by how good they are at being a one-way antenna. They're not transmitting anything back to the people that are speaking on the screen. They're just like receiving information and then vibrating kind of like an antenna. And then when the call ends, you go back to doing what you actually want to do, or would actually push the project forward.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you're being judged and evaluated for your ability to look like you're listening rather than your actual ability to listen. And then, furthermore, to execute on whatever it is that is important that you're listening to or whatever it is. And that's just, one dimension, like we talked about this sort of like audio only versus video trade off. There's a bunch of others that I sort of touched on as well. And I probably didn't even hit all of them. But the fact that that business sort of even exists just goes to show like, there's just so many people. It's just like what a tremendous waste of time people are spending on these Zoom calls where, to your point, like I didn't even, I was sort of talking about like these like 3 or 4 person Zoom calls where at least you're like a little bit active, but still like there's 4 people on a Zoom call and everyone speaks equally, you're listening 75% of the time, and you're just sort of like shaking your head or whatever. Um, but if there's like 40 people, like these like almost purely passive calls, like, oh my gosh. I mean, I just
Yeah.
if you're a CEO, just like record it as an audio only, or you can record the video if you want, but allow people to listen audio only if they want, and have all your employees go for a walk for an hour and talk to them for an hour. Like I guarantee you'll have people pay more
Yeah.
attention if you allow people to do that than if you just like have 40 people in a Zoom at this time that they can't choose, sitting in a place that they don't want to be sitting because they're there all day, looking at the camera with 40 other people looking at the camera. It's just like that can't be the best way to do things.
I can't wait for the 2.0 version of the Shark Tank app that allows you to sit in a conference room space, basically recording yourself and nodding. I can't wait until they upgrade that to being able to record a hologram of yourself just sitting at a boring ass Thanksgiving dinner while you're out with your friends, like smoking weed, eating sushi, going snowboarding, whatever. Like like an app just to make other people feel like you're participating in boring functions, whether it's professional or personal, uh, whatever it is, without them knowing that you're actually not there. Because it's basically you just created an app not to hurt people's feelings. Because if you're the CEO of a company and someone's being very productive and then you fire them for not being on a 2-hour conference call that didn't even matter, you're basically saying like, well, I don't like the way that makes me feel, even though you're doing your job. So I'm going to fire you. If you're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner and you're just a recorded hologram and you're sort of just like nodding there, sitting along, no one really gets hurt as long as they don't figure out it's not actually you. And then you could just be off doing whatever the fuck you want.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it might not quite be like a V1 to V2 jump. There's going to be some substantial leaps forward in technology for that, but I could see it at some point. And I probably won't use it for Thanksgiving. I actually like Thanksgiving dinner in particular, but I can imagine certain times where you certainly would love to put a hologram in your place.
Yeah, yeah. My Thanksgivings are pretty cool. I'm trying to think when I would actually use a hologram because I do enjoy Thanksgiving dinners. I'd probably use if I could record myself just sitting there and trying not to just like me paying attention. I would use it for I'd probably use it for gym signups, like when you go to a gym, but they have to give you a tour for 20 minutes for some
Mm.
reason to show you how to use equipment that you already know how to use. And
Throw the
like
hologram in there.
yeah, exactly. Contractually, they have to show it to you. I would just be like, all right, I'm gonna, my hologram's gonna walk into the gym, and then once it's done, I'm gonna take over and start working out. I'll probably do it for bullshit processes like that, like just sign up memberships.
Yeah, I try to prune these BS sort of events from my life as much as I can. So, fortunately I don't have like a ton of situations that come to mind, but inevitably you can't prune it all. So, certainly like a gym seminar, any kind of training basically that's like totally unnecessary. Um yeah, I can't think of like too many off the top of my head, but um
What's
it's a lot of technology, I guess, for
what's the most bullshit thing that you've pruned from your life in recent memory? Could even
mm,
be the last few years.
yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is going to an office generally. That sort of like, is a huge unlock on the rest of the day. I'm trying to think if I have anything like sort of less, basic than that. I don't
The
know.
the office one is huge.
Yeah, I'm pretty resistant to adding like sort of recurring BS things in the first place, I guess, so that I don't have maybe too many to remove. Um Yeah, nothing really pops out. I don't know, I'm very lucky. I get to spend a lot of my time doing a lot of what I want to be doing. I don't have kids yet, so I think that definitely changes things quite a bit. Where obviously you're sort of have to do a lot of things that need to be done because the kids, schedules and whatnot. So and yeah, I've got a fiance and we do things together, but there's nothing really that comes to mind that she's like sort of forcing me to go to that I really don't want to go to. So yeah, pretty good, pretty lucky, I guess, to not have a quick answer for that.
Another question that I need to ask you is, did you have any coffee this morning?
I did not, but I don't know how much you've been sort of tapped in on my little coffee journey, but I gave up caffeine completely for about a year and a half, and
Yeah, I saw that original article, and then I saw that you posted one recently saying that you had a cup of coffee.
yeah,
What inspired you to originally quit coffee? Because I've sort of just accepted my dependence on caffeine.
yeah. I this is something that I don't know. I might be like sort of flowing in and out of this for my whole life. At this point, I've sort of like seen the trend over several years. And what I mean by that is like, and actually that fits to this broader model of living that I think of a lot, which is sort of this concept of seasonal living. So it's not like, I'm going to quit coffee for the rest of my life. It's like, I'm going to take a year off coffee and then like, we'll see. Or I'm just going to stop drinking coffee for a month and then that turns into a year. And then after a year or after a year and 2 months or whatever the time is, you just sort of feel like, all right, it's, time for the next season. These sort of parameters and like circumstances in my life have changed and now, like, I want a coffee, and I don't really remember why I wasn't drinking coffee in the first place, or I don't feel as strongly about it anymore, so I'm gonna go have some coffee. So, like, something like that, and just like this living more seasonally and less like, I'm gonna do this rigid schedule for the rest of my life, or I'm gonna do this no schedule living for the rest of my life, or whatever. Like, I think there's different chapters in life that call for different things, and I like being able to sort of like flow between things. So anyway, with the specific case of coffee, um, I gave it up in October or beginning of October, I think, 2022, and didn't have a coffee and caffeinated coffee. I had a bunch of decaf, but didn't have a caffeinated coffee or really and no caffeinated tea or anything like that for about a year and a half thereafter, and so it sort of broke that no caffeine streak. I don't know, a few months ago or so, whenever I wrote
Mhm.
that article or blog, and the reason I stopped in the first place was sort of like you said. You sort of accepted this dependency. I like the idea of like not having any dependencies, or at least having as minimal as possible. Like everyone's dependent on water, like nothing you can really do about that. Dependent on like stable temperature, but there's like very few actual like dependencies that are non-negotiable. And two of the most common dependencies that are more negotiable or sort of self-selected are at least in like sort of the drugs category, which is something I think about, which is
Mm.
caffeine and nicotine. They're sort of viewed as like, well, I shouldn't really bunch them together even. Caffeine's sort of like on its own level where it's this socially acceptable thing. It's okay if you show up to a meeting in the morning and you're like, totally like groggy and like not sharp. And you just say like, I haven't had my coffee today, like apologies. Like the
Yeah.
fact that that's okay is so absurd compared to like, if you said that with any other drug, like you'd be fired, like literally on the spot, probably. Like, oh, I
Yeah,
haven't
sorry, I haven't
haven't had
shot up
my
in the bathroom yet. Haven't
exactly.
tied
Sorry,
off.
haven't had my morning cocaine yet. Excuse me. I'm a little bit, not quite as sharp. I'll be there in an hour. Like that's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
My
Uh,
hologram's blowing coke in the conference room, but personally, I haven't had it yet.
exactly. And so it's just like it's crazy. And when you view it from that angle, it's like, well, why do we treat this drug so differently from all these other drugs? And it's actually, most people they have it every day, if not multiple times a day, or at least most days. And so the effects of it are pretty, mild, at least seemingly so. Like you just get used to it and you don't feel it anymore. But if you actually quit coffee for a few weeks or something like that, and you have a cup, at least in my experience, I imagine this changes like person to person, as a lot of like sort of nutrition and dietary things do. But for me at least, like if I have a coffee, I haven't had a coffee in a few weeks, um, I will not only be like totally jazzed up for the day, but I will wake up early. I'll have trouble going to sleep, even if I have that coffee at like 7 a.m. I'll have trouble going to sleep that night, but
Oh,
like I'll,
wow.
I'll get down, I'll be okay. And then the next morning, I will wake up at like 4 a.m., like wired, like ready to go. Like the coffee's still going.
Mm.
And so it's like,
Are
it's
you
a
sure? Are you sure someone didn't spike your coffee with Adderall?
yeah,
Or
no,
you could just be hypersensitive to caffeine also.
I might be, but I know that a good chunk of that is just due to the non sort of, I don't have any tolerance from not doing it often.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Because when I start drinking it often, like, probably a couple weeks ago, I had it maybe 2 or 3 times. Probably at some point, I've mostly had it like once or twice a week since I started up again, but probably had it like 3 times at least one week. And like during those weeks, like it doesn't really hit that hard. Like it's probably close to what a normal person feels when they have coffee. Maybe it's like a little pick me up in the morning, but like not much. So like that tolerance like quickly comes back. But when you
Mm.
have it on like a fully sober body or sober mind, whatever you want to call it, it's like it's a powerful drug. Not as powerful as other drugs, of course, but like it's pretty powerful. And just to like live your whole life on this sort of up and down of that ride, I basically like at some point, I don't know if I read something or heard it in a podcast or whatever, but this mental model sort of made sense to me where when you first have coffee, you get this big, you have this sort of like equilibrium in life, right? Of like where your energy levels are and stuff like that. And when you first have coffee, you get a nice little like rise above that. And then you come back down to the baseline when it wears off. And then, you have coffee again, it goes up and then back to baseline. And over time, that up gets not as high and the return to baseline starts going below baseline. And then at a certain point, when you start having coffee like every day, it's actually just withdrawal reversal. You're not getting any boost. You're just getting back up to basically what your baseline was. And when you don't have coffee or when you're coming down from coffee, you're going below the baseline. So I don't want to like freak people out. Like it's not that big of a deal. It's just coffee. Like I sort of like temper things a little bit. But that mental model sort of makes a lot of sense to me. And I'd rather sort of have my energy levels and things sort of like, hit peaks and troughs like more naturally based on sort of like exercise or enthusiasm for what I'm working on or, whatever it might be. And so like right now, this sounds kind of hypocritical because right now I'm drinking coffee once or twice a week. Um, but that is sort of this idea that I've had in my head that I sort of like, I weigh it against, it's very hard to do something persistently for a very long period of time that's very different from the way that other people do things, especially as someone who like wants to like get a lot of work done and like be very successful with my work. When everyone around me is drinking coffee, it's almost like playing baseball in the 2000s without taking steroids or whatever, and
Oh
everyone else
yeah,
is doing it.
people are just they've got coffee pouches in their lockers. They're
Yeah.
passing it around, whispering like, "Yo, let me get a shot of coffee."
Exactly.
The trainer ran out. I need that boost before the game.
And forget about Adderall. Like I think of Adderall and those things as like probably the most one of the most impactful decisions that I don't reconsider really ever that I'm sort of implicitly making, which is to not take anything like that. I dabbled here and there. I had a prescription at some point. Like I think it's safe to say I have, I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things, but I think ADD, ADHD, whatever, these things are like sort of a spectrum. It's not like you sort of get to some point and like, oh, you have it. And like, oh, these person don't have it. Like, it's not that black and white. I think there's like sort of a spectrum. People who have like massive ADD and then people who have like, a little bit difficult time paying attention and people who are like laser focused all the time. And frankly, I think that latter population of people who are like laser focused all the time is just like kind of disintegrating with the way that, phones are and like the amount of dopamine people have in their lives these days. Like it's really hard to like have that like laser focused attention all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, for me, that's like certainly the case. And so I had a prescription at some point in college for, one of these, I think it was Vyvanse. And, I didn't really, I never took it daily or anything like that, but I would take it occasionally for like finals when work was like super busy or whatever. And, you feel like Superman, like it's insane. But then, at the end of the day, like I didn't feel so great. And I just thought that to live a life on that sort of thing, first of all, I'd probably level out at a certain point where it's similar equation to like the coffee thing, like you're just getting back to baseline. Um, and then secondarily, it's just like that thing is so powerful that like that's gonna make me sort of materially not myself, I felt like.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever sort of the costs or outcomes are, like I'd rather sort of live a more sober life than that. But as we're talking about, coffee is like sort of a much different story. So I'll stop ranting there. Curious to hear your thoughts on coffee.
No, what you said about coffee and caffeine in general being a powerful drug. If you and I've taken weeks, maybe a month long break from coffee since I've started drinking it back. I started late. I was drinking pre-workout for the first 3 years of college, didn't have coffee in high school. So in my mind, I was like, everyone's drinking coffee. I don't need caffeine, but I'm slamming like 3 scoops of pre-workout for, morning lifts at 6 a.m. And in my mind, I just like completely wasn't registering that I was taking that much caffeine and
Right.
through C4. So I started heavy caffeine intake freshman year, just slamming C4 shakes. And then I didn't start drinking coffee until my senior year in college. And then I, I've taken, maybe a month break from coffee. And when I had that first cup back, I can remember the slapping effect of how I really felt a single cup of coffee could slap you in the face. And now I'd probably have to have 3 or 4 cups to even get close to that feeling. And it wouldn't be the same feeling because it would be more of a wiry, strung out feeling from caffeine being off 3 or 4 cups rather than the euphoric single cup sort of Superman feeling when you haven't had it in a month.
Yeah.
And what you said got me thinking because if you think about ayahuasca rituals in the Amazon, where, and I've never done one personally, but I've seen videos and I've spoken to a few people on the podcast who have done psychedelic rituals in the Amazon and other places. You drink the tea, and then you have all these drums beating around you. You have people chanting. There's just a lot of external stimuli that goes into the drug that you're consuming. And typically, that only comes into the experience with psychedelics. And when you were talking, I was thinking, like, if I didn't have coffee for a month or two and I went down to the Amazon, but instead of ayahuasca, I drank a cup of coffee, and maybe, it's a pretty decent, strong cup of coffee. I think if I had those external stimuli of dancing and chanting and just like everyone around sort of in that pocket of just like wild euphoria, I think that caffeine could induce a semi psychedelic state if you were in those surroundings. And I yeah, you
I
just
would
kind of like open that up where I'm like, maybe it's not as much the drug as we think, as if it's like because like obviously caffeine's not psychedelic, but the power of it mixed with those other things, I think people don't really see how strong caffeine is because you never really do it ritualistically. At least we don't in America usually. Like it's not a ritualistic drug.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's just like a small scale ritual, I guess you could say for some people, but it's not like an actual, they're not pulling out all the stops with the dancing and everything like this. And but I think at first when you said that, I was like, skeptical, and then I started just thinking about it a little more, and I was like, you can have a psychedelic experience with no drugs. So if that's the case, you could almost certainly have it with coffee and all of these environmental things. Just by sort of taking these sort of like two inputs of like, okay, A, you can have a somewhat psychedelic experience with no drugs, and B, you're in this crazy different environment unlike any that you've been in before that's, sort of like lending itself towards having this sort of like psychedelic experience. And then you're taking a drug that, it doesn't necessarily trigger like psychedelic experience, but it throws you off of your norm. And those two things combined, the fact that you can have or those three things, I guess, the fact that you can have sort of this somewhat psychedelic experience without any drugs, the fact that you're in an environment that's sort of built to make that happen, and then just throwing yourself off the norm, I do think that's probably powerful enough that I would agree it's probably possible.
Yeah, and what you were saying before about the decision to quit caffeine and everything that went into that, I was forced to confront my own framework for what substances I would allow myself to become dependent on, because I used Kratom for about 2.5 years, and I used it most of the time as a caffeine.
What's
Uh,
that? Is that like a pre-workout as well, or?
so Kratom, the scientific name of Kratom is Metrogena speciosa, and it's a plant that's grown in Southeast Asia, and it grows as a leaf, but it's ground up into green, sometimes red powder, and you take it as a tea. So you put it
Mm.
in. I put it in hot water, just mix it around, and it produces a an awake, euphoric effect that I would say is on par with coffee if you haven't drank coffee in a while. But then there's also this mechanism that makes you feel more empathetic. I
Mm.
always felt like it was kind of coffee plus empathy for me. Like I would walk around and I would just feel like more connected to people. And I felt more creative when I was on Kratom, and I was taking it in pretty low amounts compared to some other regular Kratom users. I would take about half a teaspoon to a teaspoon at a time. And I did that for about 2.5 years as a caffeine replacement. I would
Mm.
have one coffee in the morning, and then after that, I'd switch. I'd have a couple cups of the Kratom tea.
And is there there's no caffeine in there, or?
No caffeine in
Okay,
Kratom.
so it's a separate thing that has similar effects. Is it technically a drug? Do you know?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
it's definitely a drug.
okay.
People say that it is an opioid, but I had someone on the podcast, Dr. Chris McCurdy, who studies kratom down at, I believe it's the University of Florida, or some university in Florida, but he told me that kratom is not classified as an opioid because it
Mm.
actually acts on many different systems in the body, not
Mm.
not just the opioid system. He described it as a symphony effect, where it's kind of just like branching out to everything.
Sounds
Uh,
pretty pleasant.
yeah, it in low amounts, that was the desired effect for me was the lower amounts. The more you take it, the more it feels like a relaxant. But in lower amounts, I felt this, and a lot of other people report feeling this, that it's similar to a caffeine high, or like a coffee high, like coffee, but like a warmer feeling, or maybe
Mm.
like a more dulled Adderall, like nowhere near as strong as that, but like it sort of gives you like that upper effect. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I started traveling, and I realized, or traveling more, and I realized how many countries kratom was illegal in. It's illegal in a lot of like 7 or 8 different countries in the EU that I would like to travel to and have already traveled to. It's illegal in Japan, which I ended up going to without kratom. It's illegal in Ireland, which I ended up going to without kratom. And so I never really had to think about this before because I was never one to travel with drugs. But like even the thought of getting caught internationally with drugs was such an anxiety inducing state to me that that was like 60 to 70% of the reason why I stopped taking it, because I didn't want to go on a trip, God forbid, get caught with kratom in a country like Japan where they have very stringent drug laws, or start a trip and then be coming off of the effects of kratom, kind of like caffeine withdrawal, where
Right.
you're just like kind of groggy for the first week, or like you're in a state that you don't want to be in. And that forced me to reconsider my framework for being dependent on kratom. And then I was also running into some sleep issues, which I just stopped taking a lot of supplements altogether at that time to figure out what it was, and it was probably kratom. But yeah, that's sort of my framework. I have a different framework than you, because you have it seems like a desire to be dependent on as little substances as possible, whereas me, my framework is I'm willing to be dependent on a small amount of substances not necessary for survival, but it can't interfere or boost my anxiety. It can't interfere with my sleep at all. Uh,
Yeah.
and it can't be illegal, which has to do with
Right.
anxiety because that's it's just stressful to think about that.
Yeah. Let me say a couple more things on this, because I think it's related to what you just said. So, um, and by the way, I don't really have a desire to be like, in general, I want to be directionally not dependent on I want to be dependent on as little as possible for as much as of the time, really, as I can. But like, that's not like a hard, like, optimize function or maximize function. Like, it sort of goes back to the seasonal living thing I mentioned earlier. Like, right now, I feel no qualms about having the occasional coffee. I just described to you like my entire like thesis and philosophy for why I don't think coffee is great generally, but here I am drinking it, no problem. Kind of period that I'm in my life right now feels good. I'm able to have it once or twice a week without missing it the other 5 or 6 days or using it as an excuse for why I can't do as well on those days, which is something that I noticed happening previously in the past after enough time having it like 2 or 3 days a week. So like right now I'm in a good place and like, the balance is in check, but like that can sort of change. So that's one thing. The other thing though is like other reasons to consider giving up coffee, if you want to for a period of time. Just so that people can understand the rationale, they can choose whether or not they want to buy in and try it. But like you mentioned, uh what was the first thing actually? It was, as long as it doesn't induce
If
anxiety, and then what was the other thing?
anxiety inducing, it can interfere with my sleep.
Sleep, right.
Which
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
I'm also lucky that, for coffee, if as long as I stop drinking it sometime in the early afternoon, it doesn't seem to surface level affect my sleep, but I also haven't done any sleep studies, and I don't use anything to track it, so it's possible it could be affecting my sleep. I'm just not aware of it.
Yeah, I think when you become tolerant to these, with usage, as with most drugs, I think they're just like less extreme. And so, coffee should have a less significant negative effect on your sleep. It should have a less significant negative effect or less significant effect overall, positive or negative. But one of the things that I found, basically, like when you don't have it for a while and then you have it from, you go from 0 to 1, having it for the first time in weeks or whatever, all of the effects are emphasized because you don't have that tolerance. And what I've realized is, first of all, what I told you about my sleep. So for you, coffee, you're sleeping fine. So why would, giving up coffee to sleep better is nonsense because you have no sleep problem. Like there's no reason. But other people drink coffee every day or multiple times a day. And even if they stop before 10 or 11 a.m., they just have chronically bad sleep. And for those people, to me, it's like a no brainer. Like, get rid of coffee and just at least run the test. Give yourself a month, see if your sleep improves without coffee. And if it does, you might much prefer the good sleep to the daily cup of coffee or whatever. So I'm not saying that's a good reason for you. I don't think it is, but for a lot of people, it could be. One thing for you though, again, I'm not trying to like push you. I'm not some kind of like coffee, I don't know what you would call it, but I'm not trying to like,
Yeah.
defeat
Jake
coffee.
is Jake is bathing in a vat of coffee right now. That's
Yeah.
why he has the camera off. He's a coffee shaman
Yeah,
or
I'm not trying.
anti-coffee shaman.
Exactly. I'm not trying to like, kill coffee for good or something,
Yeah.
but and I love the taste, I love the ritual, and I love the feeling. Like everything about coffee I love, other than sort of the, persistent. I like all these things I'm talking about, the nuances, I guess. Like all things equal, if it's my last day on planet Earth, I'm gonna have a coffee, no doubt. Well, maybe not no doubt, but probably. So anyway, the thing that I would, that you could maybe consider that would be relevant for you or for other people listening is, I do think that coffee, I have noticed from these, like I said, like sort of magnified experiences because I have it less frequently, is it definitely, for me personally, again, it might not be for everyone, but for me personally, it definitely um increases my emotional volatility, I would say. And so that's like sort of like, what does that mean? Emotional volatility. That's like I can be happier, I can be sadder, I can be more easily frustrated. I'm not one of these people, like, I just don't really, I don't have issues with anxiety. I do have, like, sort of some back pain issues, or at least fortunately, I've been good for, like, several months now after sort of a big turn of events, but, historically, I've had back pain for, like, several years,
Mm.
sort of off and on, and I wonder if that had to do with sort of masking anxiety and, like, the sort of this physical sensation, but I'm not someone, for whatever reason, good or bad, who really feels anxiety, or at least it's not bothersome to me. I don't I, like, almost have a hard time identifying that feeling. It's, like, sort of foreign. Like, I kinda know stress. I mean, I do know stress, but a lot of my friends, like, have a lot of trouble with anxiety, and it's just not a thing, but for me, really, that much. But and again, I'm not saying I'm, like, better. I honestly think it probably expresses itself a little bit differently, like in this sort of physical pain or something.
Mhm.
Um, but anyway, if you give the benefit of the doubt to this idea that coffee sort of can increase your emotional volatility, then that's another reason. So basically, it's like if you're a person who has trouble with sleep and you're drinking coffee daily, or you have a coffee habit, or if you're someone who has, anger issues, or anxiety, struggles with anxiety, or is depressive, or like any of these issues, I would try removing this drug addiction from your life. It's like when you put it that way, it, like, doesn't sound that crazy. But most people just don't think of it like it's just a separate category that doesn't sort of get considered along with other drugs. So anyway, I think I've kind of, like, said my piece on it, but that's just one more thing. I have somewhere I wrote this blog post. I probably put like 10 reasons to
Yeah.
consider quitting coffee for a while. And again, I'm not trying to push anyone to do so. I'm drinking coffee once or twice a week as we speak, but it's just something to keep in mind. I think it's good to make the choices that you're making, especially things that you're doing every day, like these sort of defaults in your life, to make those decisions intentionally rather than just do what everyone else is doing.
You mentioned that you thought your back pain could have been connected to anxiety somehow, and there was a big turn of events. What was that?
Yeah, so basically I've had this, like, sort of chronic back and neck pain since like, more or less since I graduated college, or right around that time. And I started my career in investment banking, so I was working, like, unusual hours, sitting at a desk for unusual hours, so I sort of attributed it to that. It started right around the time I had, like, my summer internship. Um, and but then, I quit banking, and COVID hit, and I wasn't really doing much work at all. I was, like, actually running a lot and, like, in the best shape of my life, and not working all that much, and still the back pain was there. So I was like, "All right, what's going on? Like, this isn't from sitting at a desk, I guess. What is it?" And
Mm.
it's been sort of this fortunate thing, or at least I choose to view it that way, that it's motivated me to actually just become a lot healthier. Like I mentioned, the running, I started running a ton, started eating and a lot better. I started fasting, doing intermittent fasting, and, like, just eating a lot better in general. I probably cut like 30 pounds, which was like a much healthier weight.
Hell yeah.
And then, like, started lifting. And so it's like sort of every step of this health journey has sort of been motivated by this desire that it's like, well, if I'm just overall healthier, this back pain might just kind of, like, go away. And it just kind of never really worked. But then about 6 months ago, I read this book called Healing Back Pain by Joe Sarno. And
Mm.
it's pretty well known by a lot of people, but, like, not at the same time, not everyone would know it. It's sort of this, like, miracle book for millions of people, but also if you're not one of those, millions or 10 millions, like, you would have never heard of it. But it's sort of this, like, controversial doctor who explains this sort of like mind body connection. And basically, he describes the back pain as sort of what I was alluding to earlier, for a lot of people being attributable to it's basically your body trying to, or really your mind trying to play a trick on you, to use physical pain as a distraction, um, from emotional pain or something, an undesirable emotion. So that could be
Mm.
anxiety or anger or anything like that. And so that's what I was sort of saying earlier. I feel like I may have been sort of like, I'm just totally speculating, but I'm guessing, given the number of people who are just like me in a lot of ways, who describe these sort of, like, troubles with anxiety, and that I just have a hard time identifying with that. but I also have this back pain that they don't identify with, sort of like makes sense. And reading this book sort of made sense. So it's like, all things considered, would I prefer this low level pain that's not very harmful in any way to that emotional sort of struggle? Maybe. Like, I don't think that's, at least it's not an obvious answer, no. Um, but reading this book, this was actually my second time reading it. I read it a few years prior. And for whatever reason, the second time it like resonated a lot more strongly. And people like basically people describe reading this book and having their chronic pain sort of dissolved like overnight almost. And basically, the
Mm.
first time I read it, that the book resonated with me. But when that didn't happen, I was sort of discouraged. I was like, well, this book didn't fix my issue like these other people, so it must not be my thing. But then I think what happened was like 3 years later, the pains persisted for another 3 years, and I've tried like more things like chiropractor, and I've been in better shape. I'm lifting, all these things, and none of it had really made any noticeable difference whatsoever. And so I think I was in more of like a I think the author, the doctor, or someone said like the person who's going to get the most out of this book is the person who needs it the most, or something like that. And so like the first time I read it, my back pain wasn't as like, it hadn't been around for as long, and it just wasn't as big of a, I just didn't really care as much. I hadn't tried as many things to fix it. And then the second time around, maybe I needed an answer more, and this was my answer. And I think, like your mind is like a very powerful thing, and like even if it wasn't my answer, believing that it was my answer could have been an answer. And I can't exactly describe to you like why it's helped me, but the last 6 months have been like the best 6 months in terms of like having back pain or neck pain that
Wow.
I've had in 6 years.
What
And
it what is
it's
he
not like totally gone, it's not like I don't feel my back anymore or my neck or anything, but overall, substantially, I think the last 6 months, best 6 months of the last 6 years.
what does he prescribe in the book? What are some of the things that he has you do to, because you said his hypothesis is that it's anxiety or some sort of negative emotion that's being stored, or
Yeah.
like you're using it, it's being uh
You're dodging it basically.
dodging it, and it's that emotion's being stored in your back rather than confronting that emotion. So what is he prescribed to get that sort of blockage, that pain out of the back? How do you work through
Yeah,
that?
it's not like, I don't know that it's so much, I mean, that's one way to think about it. It's not so much as like a stored emotion. What's actually happening, as he describes it at least, is um your sort of subconscious recognizes, and I might be messing this up a little bit. It's been several months since I read it, like I said, but like roughly, your subconscious is angry about something nonsensical. So, for example, like it can be about something real, but it can also be totally nonsensical. And it's like a baby is crying in proximity to you, and you're angry because it's like an annoying noise. But everyone knows like you don't get mad at a baby for crying. Like that's ridiculous. And so you're
I mean,
doing
I've
like,
definitely gotten mad at more than a few babies on an
sure,
airplane
sure, but
before.
but you're not gonna have an outburst, right? Like you're not gonna like yell at the thing. That's
No,
you
no,
sort of are.
it's mostly I'm just devising ways to get rid of the sounds in my head. So that's sort of a creative. I'm creating my own emotional distraction in my head rather than my back to get rid of this baby.
Right. And so and so you're doing this like consciously.
Yeah.
What happens to some other people maybe is like their subconscious protects them from even knowing that they're angry. And because it's like anger is not pleasant and it's not right here. So like we're gonna distract from that. We're gonna distract the conscious from even noticing that the subconscious knows that we're angry here. And the way that the conscious, or the way that like the mind sort of does this, I forget the name of this, the bodily system, but it was really nice because I think the first time I read it, I didn't really understand this. And like, it's not really great to hear like it's all in your head. Like, that's not like a very nice solution. Like, it's kind of doesn't make you feel great.
No one who
Um,
ever says that has good intentions. No one's ever saying it in good faith. They're
yeah.
like, yeah, it's all in your head.
It's like,
Stop
oh,
bitching
well,
about it.
yeah, it's like I got my answer. It's all in my head. Like we're all good. Like that's not really
Yeah.
satisfactory. And so the second time reading, I sort of started to understand a little better. What he's saying is like there's actually a physiological course of events that are happening, it's triggered by like your mind or your subconscious, but there's actually physical things that happen. And what happens is your brain basically, again, excuse me if I'm being a little bit rough here with the details, but like you're kind of slowing down or shutting down like blood flow slash oxygen flow to certain parts of the body. And this is why the chronic pain tends to be in specific places, common across many people. And it's like sort of like above the shoulder, like neck area, and then like lower back area, and even like, the glutes and stuff like that, and like the hips, and like it's those sort of specific points for whatever reason. And basically what's happening is those areas, or one of those areas, is like not getting enough oxygen. So there's actually some oxygen deprivation, which then leads to this feeling of pain. So your subconscious or your mind or whatever, your body is sort of triggering this this real sensation through the oxygen deprivation of feeling pain. And then the feeling of that pain distracts you from whatever the conscious sort of feeling would have been that you're sort of being protected from, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think like, because I've had a similar situation where I was feeling a lot of pain in my lower back up until about a year and a half ago. But I chalk that up to I retired from college baseball, or not. It's weird to say I retired from college baseball. Nobody would draft me into minor league baseball, so I was forced to stop playing in 2017, and I started sitting a lot more for work. And so I just chalked it up to, okay, I was practicing 2 to 3 hours a day, lifting, walking around campus. Now I'm sitting. It's probably just that. And then I did the same thing where I looked for exercises to try to heal the back pain, stretches, lifting.
Right.
I even went to PT a couple times, and that didn't help.
Yeah.
I spent months and months just repeating exercises in the morning that didn't seem to
So
make an ounce of difference. And
can I can
yeah,
I interject just before I forget? So
yeah,
because I didn't really answer your question earlier. His prescription is, like, for lack of a better word, do nothing. And it's interesting because what you just described is the same exact experience I had. I tried chiropractor, I tried yoga, you were lifting, you were stretching, you were doing all these different things. And all of these things have this implied belief underneath that you have a physical problem that you need to find a way to solve. And that's only going to further this thing from continuing. You're sort of, you've been totally duped into believing that you have a physical problem when in reality, it's just a trick that your subconscious is playing on you. And so that's why the book, just reading it, can fix it for some people, because it's sort of like the curtain has been pulled back and you see that it's just a trick and you can't unsee that, and the trick doesn't work anymore. But I think for a lot of other people, myself included, it doesn't just happen overnight. Like, you have to really, it's hard to believe that you can just read a book and the next day you'll be totally good. And so like you have to really sort of try to get that idea to really sink in to the point where, like, at the subconscious level almost, you believe that you have no physical problem.
yeah.
Um, and I think I was able to do that this time around. And it helps to, talk about it that way as well. Like, I used to have back pain, not like I'm dealing with back pain and like stuff like that. And it also, it might sound like a little bit woo woo or whatever, but all I can say is it's worked reasonably well for me, and it's worked for like millions of people. So he says, like, explicitly in terms of treatment, um, he has certain things that basically help these ideas to like settle in, and like I was mentioning. But his like specific treatments are actually not to do anything, but to stop doing everything.
Mm,
Stop going to the chiropractor, stop doing physical therapy. These things are all making it worse, by sort of playing into the trick. And then he says, start doing things that you were afraid to do because you didn't think you could do them because you were physically limited.
mm.
Because that's sort of the other side of things. So that's like sort of his treatment. Obviously, you could read the book for more, but
Dude,
I just wanted to circle back on the answer to that.
that's exactly. I mean, that's a perfect lead in because that's exactly where I was gonna go. Because after the year and a half to 2 years of just doing all these, just like 10 to 15 morning mobility exercises plus going to some PT. I tried to get back into lifting because I thought, okay, I love squatting, I love doing RDLs, I love deadlifting. Maybe if I do that, I'll strengthen my back. But I went into it as if I had an injured back. So I was not squatting to full depth. I was being super careful with my back, using much lighter weight than I would normally use. And I still had a lot of back pain. It was bothering me a shit ton. And then I probably took another year off of squatting and doing any sort of pulling movement like RDLs. I was still lifting, but just in ways that wouldn't involve me hinging at my hips or sort of like folding my body in half like an RDL. And then I came across Dr. Mike Israetel's channel, who has a great lifting channel. You should definitely check it out. He's at Renaissance Periodization on YouTube. And Dr. Mike Israetel is a huge proponent of full range of motion for whatever you're doing. To get a really deep stretch at the bottom, don't hyper focus on rep count. Don't hyper focus on the weight. Just like obviously you want to track that eventually and get to a place where you're progressing, but don't make that the focus of your workout. You really want to feel the mind muscle connection and you want to feel everything you're doing. So this last time when I went back to squatting, I did full range of motion. I didn't do a 20-minute warm up like I would normally do with an injured back, like just making sure everything's loose. I just did like 10 reps of a lower weight and I kept going up progressively. Felt little to no pain, and just like going into squatting with a fuller range of motion than before, I had so much less pain and eventually zero pain in my lower back, which doesn't make sense because you'd think I'm only aggravating it more. But that was something that I consciously switched on, is that I'm not going to go into this like an injured person. I'm not going to take all these precautions. Same thing with doing the RDLs. I just, I did some warm ups, deadlifts, do some more, and my back feels amazing. I haven't really changed significantly the amount of time I'm sitting or doing podcasting. That's remained relatively constant, but just like the act of going into intense physical activity as a like making myself believe like I'm not an injured person. Like I don't have. I don't know if I went as far to say I don't have a back problem, but I went into it going like, just let yourself be free. Don't like you're not like a brittle person. You've thrown baseballs your entire life. That's like takes huge body contortions. You've lifted, decently heavy weights for your size. Like, stop putting this thing into your head that you're just like a brittle toothpick that's ready to snap any second. So when you said that, I haven't read this book. I'd be curious to check it out, but that sounds like a similar mentality that led to me retrying squatting and other lifting techniques through the full range of motion, which you would think would aggravate my muscles and back even more, but it did not.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, like I was saying from the book, he says like, stop being scared of things, basically, like do these things that you've been limiting yourself from because you think you need to. And it sounds like you just sort of arrived at that conclusion yourself and tried this full range of motion thing. And then things start getting better. And it's like, just as the negative sort of loop is sort of like a self-fulfilling negative pattern, you sort of flip the switch and it's like, wait, I'm doing these full range of motions and my back's feeling good. That's like a self-fulfilling sort of positive loop where you're like, okay, like you sort of broke your belief that you had this bad back that was limiting you. You're like, I'm doing all this stuff and I feel great. And then you're just kind of done with it. And for me, it's like, I think I substantially broke the belief. I don't expect to like never have back and neck pain again, because I know from the last 6 months, like I have had, bits here and there. But I think it's hard once you've fully sort of seen the distraction for what it is and broken it for a substantial period of time. I think it's going to be pretty hard for it to convince you as compellingly as it used to again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to say that there are a lot of clear physical mechanisms behind why full range of motion is better than just partial range of motion or half range of motion. And Mike Israetel describes that in detail on his YouTube channel. I'll definitely butcher those mechanisms if I try to just recall them offhand. So if anyone listening to this is interested in the science behind hypertrophy, full range of motion, sort of like the techniques to maximize muscle building that may help with a lower back issue you're going through. Everyone's has a different situation, but I definitely check out Renaissance periodization on YouTube. So you, Jake, you were the head coach of a JV high school basketball team.
That's right.
How many quotes from the movie Coach Carter did you memorize to say at practice? Because I would have just had a clipboard just screaming out like, "You got to pay 50 free throws to leave this gym, boy. Where do you think you're going?"
Yeah, I didn't. That was pretty good actually. It sounded like we're doing the audio only. I thought you like threw on a movie clip there. It didn't even sound like
Yeah,
it, but
you like my Samuel Jackson voice?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know that I memorized any quotes, but I definitely watched the movie. I forget when exactly, but probably plus or minus a month from when I started. I forget if it was before or after, but and I watched the Hoosiers as well, and I shouldn't Glory Road's another good basketball movie. I don't think I watched that last season. There's a few good basketball movies out there. I watched Love and Basketball at some point as well, which was like this hyped up. It's like got good reviews and whatnot, and it's pretty old. It's like from the '80s or something. It's pretty bad in my view. But anyway, Coach Carter's the GOAT, I would say. Sort of like the Remember the Titans of basketball movies. It doesn't compare with Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans is one of the all-time bests in my book. But yeah, Coach Carter's great. And so yeah, I mean it was awesome. It was a ton of fun. We actually had it's like hard for me to communicate without sounding silly, but we had the last game of our season. There's no playoffs or anything. For us coaching the junior varsity team, and so no playoffs, and so the last game of the season is just last game of the season, but it happened to be like significantly the best team on our schedule. Like the varsity team lost by like 50 points. They like played after us or whatever, and we actually beat them, and it was like this crazy game that it was an away game for us, so at their court, and they had like a packed house because it was like their senior night or whatever. And it was a really cool gym. I forget what the deal is. Some pro basketball player, I want to say, like sort of funded this school as he sort of like backed this school. I think it's like a charter school or something.
Mm.
So like they put a lot of pride in their basketball. And meanwhile, my school, we're like practicing on pavement. Like the guys, we don't even have a basketball court, like a gym at least. We have a court that's on pavement in the back of the school. And so it's like this like movie, like obviously it's JV and like nothing's on the line or whatever. But it felt like the game, we were down 5 with a minute to go, came back, tied it up with a 3-point play, went into overtime and won. And like the 2 best players were late to the game, and like, I had them sit to start the game because I said, up front, if anyone is late, like don't expect to start. And I was really glad I said don't expect to start, not don't expect to play, because if I said that, would have had a tough choice between sticking to my word and sitting the best 2 players on the team. One of those guys went off for 30 points, which was like evidently like a school record. So it was insane, and it was just so much fun. So I'm doing it again this year. I'm like, my life circumstances are a little bit different. I'm like very busy with working on a project in the crypto space. And it's sort of like this all hands on deck. It's sort of like I'm building a startup for really the first time. I tried to start a company when I was after my freshman year of college. I took a gap year and tried to start a company, but I was 19 years old. This is a little bit different this time around. So I'm like working really hard right now, and I'm not sure exactly how I'm gonna sort of balance everything. I'm also recording podcasts still and everything like that. But I'll make it work. And it's like, honestly, it takes some time out of the week, and it takes a lot of mind share as well. Like I'm like thinking about the basketball team like all day. It was like, pretty surprising, but I just like, I really loved it. If money was no object, I would probably just coach at least, I'm definitely doing it this year. And if money was no object, I wouldn't really see myself stopping. But think like I talked about earlier, like seasonal living, stuff like that. Maybe I would sort of get sick of it at some point. So anyway, it's I'm really looking forward to it this year. I will balance it with my work, and hopefully we'll have a better team than we did last year.
What inspired you to get into coaching JV basketball? Because I've thought about getting into being a coach or an assistant coach in baseball for probably like around the same age, middle school, early high school. What drew you to wanting to get into that?
Yeah, if you can carve out the time, this is for you, but also for anyone listening. Like, if you're interested in that sort of thing, and you can carve out the time for one season, like my whole thing is like it's worth trying. Otherwise, you can sort of wonder your whole life if you might have liked to coach, and you just won't know. Or you can wait to coach your kids' team when you're, 35 or 40 or 45 or whatever, and that's like not really real. I mean, it's coaching little kids or whatever. And then eventually your kids grow up and maybe you get a chance to coach a high school team when you're 55 or whatever. And it's like, well, now, you're not, that's not really gonna be like a big part of your life.
Mm.
And that's fine, but it's like, just, try it for a season if you can have, if you can make the time. But it's one of these things that unless you have a strict 9 to 5, which obviously a lot of people do, but it fits in really nicely as a side thing because it's like, I mean, most schools might be Monday to Friday. Our school, it's Monday to Thursday, with either practices or games. And it's in the afternoons or evenings. Afternoons if it's a practice, evenings if it's a game. And it's like 3 months out of the year. So it's like a small part of weekdays towards the end of the days when you're not in I get my best work done before noon, let alone before like 3 or 5. And then it's a seasonal thing. It's not for the whole year. It's just 3 months. So if you can make it work, I think it's well worth trying. And even if like it's not to say like you're gonna go do this and like become a career coach or something, but I think it's worth doing like these diverse experiences because they translate really well to just teaching you about like sort of they become useful as sort of cross references and other things in life. Just to have these like significantly different experiences. And so that's kind of why I did it. I always had this, thought, and I thought maybe I've romanticized it a bit that I might love to be a basketball coach. And I wanted to sort of put that to the test. Like, if it doesn't go that well, then I realized I was really romanticizing this. It's actually not that fun when you get to it and don't really enjoy it. And I'm not particularly good at it. And you can sort of say, okay, good experiment, and I won't do that again. But in actuality, it surpassed all of my expectations. It was more fun than I could have expected. I was better at it than I would have expected. And it was just a more positive experience than I possibly could have imagined.
What was the thing that surprised you the most about coaching JV basketball, or the thing that you weren't expecting it to exceed your expectations, but ended up doing it by far?
One thing that was surprising, I don't know if it's like the most surprising necessarily, but the reason I was interested partially was like I love sports, I love basketball, but I don't love basketball as much as like basketball, like
Is my favorite sport. I like the way you
yeah,
dribble up and down the court.
yeah. I don't like there's people with the sports like they're so sports are so popular. There's you go to the 80th, 90th percentile of people who like those sports, and these people are like obsessed. And I'm not really that way about any sports. I love basketball, I love baseball. I'm not watching, every game of the NBA season or whatever. I love March Madness. So I'm sort of like, I'm a big basketball guy. I played high school basketball, but like I'm not like huge. But the other reason I thought I would really like it is because um, I like to I started this other thing called Life Advice where I'll do like these hour-long calls with people who book calls to just sort of discuss like the big things in life if they're like at an inflection point or they don't like their job or they're having trouble with relationships or just like anything. It's just like someone to bounce things off of who will be sort of reasonable and just try to help. And usually I can answer like sort of ask the right questions and they'll sort of come up with their own answers, and it's an hour that can be like sort of a transformative call, I think, for a lot of people, or at least they can get like sort of one really positive, big lever thing out of it. And so I like sort of mentoring people, for lack of a better word, or just like helping shape the lives of, people who are younger than me.
Mm.
And so I look back at like my, growing up and everything, and like I definitely developed a lot more from high school basketball than I did from any particular teacher in high school or any particular class. Um, that might not be true for all people, but I think that high school as a time, and particularly sports during high school, are this like very important time where you can really, be influenced, and your sort of life path can be altered.
Mm.
And so to be able to participate in that time for these kids and do it in the context, it's basically being a teacher in the context of sports rather than being a teacher in the context of history or English or whatever.
Mm.
And so that was super compelling to me. And then so like those things were sort of expected. And one thing, just to answer your question on like surprise, I've never really had, well, this has changed a little bit now with my startup that I'm doing. But prior to that, I never really had like people working under me. Um, I was an analyst in investment banking for a couple of years, so there's like junior analysts, but not like direct reports. They're just like sort of a year or two behind me. And then, my next job was working with a guy on a team of like five, and it was just kind of a flat culture. Again, like no one sort of like reporting up into me. So I'd never really like managed people before or like been someone's boss. And like the first day I like walk in as the coach, and the varsity coach sort of like introduces me. And it was just amazing to me. Like you get default respect from
Yeah.
like these kids. Like they're
Yeah.
just, you are the coach and like they will do what you say. And like
It's a
obviously,
lot of power.
yeah, there's like, there's troublemakers and there's, all sorts of things that you'll find, but the default is that they will do what you tell them to do, which is just like crazy. It was just like crazy to me because I never really experienced that before. And I was like, man, like I have a lot, this is great. I don't have to like, win. I'm used to having to like sort of win people's respect, which, is fine. And I think that's really how it should be in most cases. But to walk in the door and get that like sort of default respect was a big surprise on day one. And then from there on over the course of the season, I like to think, and from sort of several, data points, I guess I know like I did earn the respect on
Mm.
top of that default of the players, at least the vast majority of them. Um, and I don't know what's going to happen this year, like how many of them are going to move on to varsity or whatever, but it's going to be another new and cool experience to be able to coach kids for a second season, some of the same guys. And that'll be interesting as well. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And the first season, like, 10 out of 10 recommend to a friend if you can carve out the
Yeah.
time. It's pretty cool. And I think, basketball appeals to me. It's just such a team sport. Um, but baseball, I think, would be pretty cool and interesting in sort of some other ways. Like, I think all of these sports are materially different from one another. Some might have more overlap than others, but baseball, I think, is quite a different one. Football is another that's quite a different one, I think. Um, so I don't know, whatever
Yeah.
appeals to you. Obviously, not just the sport, but sort of the dynamics of the team and what how you're going to be sort of serving as a coach.
If you could pick someone to play you as the coach in a basketball movie, who would you pick to play yourself?
Oh, it's a great question. The first that comes to mind is Vince Vaughn. But I
Mm.
don't that's like sort of my general pick for myself. I don't know that I see him as a basketball coach. Um,
I mean, the classic is like Ben Affleck, Matthew McConaughey. I feel like those two are like the big coach roles. Samuel
yeah.
Jackson too.
Well, Ben
You,
Affleck did the basketball coach. McConaughey did We Are Marshall, right?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Ben Affleck was the alcoholic basketball
Yeah.
coach.
I can't do Affleck. Affleck would be a good one, but I can't do it because he's already done it, and his character was not what I would want my character to be at all. No, he was like a good guy or whatever, but it's a little bit of a tough movie. It's a good movie. I forget what it's called, but McConaughey was great as a coach, but I wouldn't compare myself to McConaughey. I'm gonna go with Vince Vaughn. I think he could do it. I think he could pull it off.
Yeah, that's a good choice. I always thought if I was going to be a baseball coach or just like biographical movies in general, I think if I was ever to the point where people knew what I looked like, where I was famous enough for people to know that I'm a white dude, I always thought it would be hilarious to have someone who looks nothing like me to play me in a biographical pic. So maybe I would pick Terry Crews or Ken Jeong, like, but just like you don't mention it for the entire movie. Like it's just like an Asian dude playing a white guy.
Right.
And it's just like no one says anything about like it's just unquestioned. And at the end of the movie, where they always have like the real person and the person who played them. It's just like me face to face with Ken Jeong. It was like, what the fuck? Like, why did
Yeah.
Ken Jeong play this guy?
I just watched, I mean, it reminds me of two things. One is, all these like Disney or Netflix movies these days, they're like, it's not that they're based necessarily on real people, but they'll have like, the Vikings, like, old time Vikings or something. And they're like, some of them are like black and Asian. And it's
Yeah.
like, what? Like these people are all from the same place at this time in history. It's just like not a thing or whatever. But then the other thing is I just watched Chernobyl. So this like side by side face thing of like the real person versus the actors, like very top of mind. I literally finished it like 2 nights ago.
Mm.
And that one I was surprised. It's always nice when you see these movies and you get to those end. Like sometimes it's like a very, they didn't quite like take you and make him Terry Crews or have Terry Crews play you, but like they do take some liberty in like stretching out, this person is like a much better looking this actor's like a much better looking version of like this real person. But
Oh yeah.
Chernobyl, like some of the characters were like shockingly similar looking to the real life people. So it was pretty cool. I like respect that they did that because you have to be, it's got to be harder. You might be taking some sort of sacrificing some acting chops or something for the sake of making them look alike. Or at least you're just like having to test out a bunch more people to find that right person who can act and looks a lot like the real person. So anyways, it was a pretty good show.
Yeah. I remember watching the end. I saw when it first came out, probably 4 maybe 5 years ago now. I forget which year, but I do remember thinking, damn, these do look very close to the actors, uh, the real people versus the people playing them. And now that you're saying it, it's like it would be weird if you found someone that looked like the person from Chernobyl, but and let's say like they looked like the person from Chernobyl and then they were also a great actor, but then the director goes, "Wait, but we need someone hot to be running away from Chernobyl. Like we can't we can't have ugly people. We can't have like a 7 or 6 out of 10 being burned by nuclear waste. We need a hot person to do that. It's like a weird thing to like cast up for looks
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah, it's a weird context. Maybe that's why it ended up accurate, just because they didn't have really any good excuse. It's like we're talking about like a nuclear blow up here. Like let's just pick the people who look like the people and call it a day.
Yeah. So you also wrote a rap album a few years ago.
That's true. Yeah, more than a few years ago.
What was your rap name?
I can't tell you. I'm pretty open book, and I was just gonna just tell you, but I shouldn't. That's not something I should tell right now.
Okay, so it's like anonymous, but it's on Spotify just under a different name.
It's not on Spotify, it's on SoundCloud, and yeah, that's
Gotcha.
just to be clear, I wouldn't mind saying the name. I wanted to say the name because I love the name, but, I don't want people to go and find it. I might put it out there one day, but
Okay.
I would do that, on my own accord. Yeah, it was, I use Jake as my name, everything I do on the internet, and that's my, legal name. I just don't use my last name to keep the pseudonymity. My rap name was, it didn't involve Jake at all. And this was, for context, this was like rapping with my buddies in high school, probably junior and senior year or something like that. And then I sort of carried the habit into college and would sort of like freestyle when I was back together with them, or even, record some stuff when I was back together with them over the summer or whatever. And then even in my gap year, when I mentioned I was starting that company, that's actually where I sort of took some stuff that I had recorded, and I might have recorded some new, I'm almost certain I recorded some new stuff as well. And then I packaged it together in like a 8 or 10, more than 8. I think it was like a 10 song album that's on SoundCloud somewhere. Um, And on, it's not bad. I can't. I'm not ready
You don't
to
want
put it
people
out there.
stealing your flow. You want
Yeah,
to keep the secret sauce secret.
exactly. And it's like it's so long ago. It's more so a concern of I'm not like embarrassed by it, but the lyrics are,
A
it's a high school.
misrepresentation.
I'm in high school. I'm in early in college. It's
Yeah.
like it's nothing like outrageous, but it's it's just a little bit childish to be putting out there super proudly at just turning 30 years old.
Yeah. Well, I will say I did record a rap. I think this must have been 27, because that's what I was asking. Because during the pandemic, obviously things are shut down. I got bored with options in New York, and so I remembered that I recorded a few just instrumental raps for fun in college, and then I would go on the internet, I'd download these instrumentals, loop them through GarageBand, and then just rap over them. And it was fun as fuck, first of all, and then it was much more meditative than what I remembered. Just
Hmm.
listening to a loop over and over and waiting for it to get back to that same part so you can think of the next lyric, and then you're just kind of like thinking while it's playing and then getting into a flow. I feel like it is a form of a musical meditation, and I don't know how you were recording it, if you were making your own beats or you were ripping instrumentals, but I'm not talented enough to make a decent beat from scratch. So I would just
Yeah.
download, pre-made instrumentals and then put them into GarageBand. But it is like I now that I'm thinking about it, I should just go back and just fucking like do it for fun more often. Like kind of like one of those things, like it's seasonal, you just do it until you get bored of it. Like it
Yeah.
was a really fun period where, at 8 o'clock, when my energy for podcasting and work and other things is down, for some reason I felt like my rap energy peaked around 8 9 p.m. Like I would get on fucking like runs where I would be recording till 11:30 12 a.m. and I like completely was oblivious to what time it was, which is kind of weird because I would have assumed my creative energy would be zapped earlier in the day, but it was a very fun period that I should go back to.
Yeah, it's like it's, kind of textbook like flow state, and kind of a double entendre given like flow is like a big part of rap, but like it's a literal, you get lost, you lose the time, you get just into this beat, you're waiting for the next top of the beat. Like you said, you're going back to the beginning of your lyric, you're sounding it out, you're getting to the end, you're going back to the beginning. Like it's like writing, but it's a very specific type of writing where there's sort of rhythm involved, there's lyrics involved, you're trying to rhyme, you're listening to music. And that's all if you're doing it by yourself. And then there's the other sort of side of things, which is like socially as well. Like, I don't know, for at least for me, like in high school and even college, like the idea of like, we never actually did this, but the idea of like going to an actual studio with like your boys and just like hanging out and rapping is like, that's like the best thing ever. Like you
Yeah.
could, like, that's the dream. And so we would do like a makeshift version of that. We had a room in the school that we found that one of our buddies did make beats. So he would make the beats and we would all go and sort of like, mess around with it. And then, um, I would also take beats like just from YouTube or whatever, like you said. And so we would do that at the school. We would also do that like at my house. There was a pond in the back with like a little cabin with like no electricity. It's like the size of, smaller than a living room, like the size of like an office or something. It's just like a one room
Oh yeah.
cabin. And we would just like hang out there and like, light a candle, put the microphone up
The
and like,
candle's hard as fuck. If you're
yeah,
rapping with a candle, you know that shit's gonna be fucking hard.
yeah. And so it was just, like there's literally like no power down here. We've got like a laptop and a microphone and, a candle and we're just like hanging out. It's like you can get into a lot more in trouble in high school than sitting around rapping. And, it's kind of silly, but it was like a ton of fun. In addition to my like own stuff, actually on that album, at least two or three of my buddies that I'm talking about, it's like four or five of us, at least two or three are sort of like featured on it at some point. And then separately from the album, we've got like, I know there's like this one freestyle that comes to mind that all of us are on. That is just like we all just like went off like randomly. I don't know how it sort of happened, but it's like to this day, like
Wow.
it just sounds great.
Any
And
of
we
those
all
guys
love
go on
listening.
to be rappers professionally, or are any of them still doing it?
No, the guy who made well, I should say, the guy who made beats, I was never as close of friends with. Like he was never really over my house. He was, doing the beats. We would sort of hang out at the school and whatever. And he actually, I haven't kept up with him, but as of like, 4 or 5 years ago, so it's like several years after high school, a few years after college, he was still very much involved with like music. He got into like lo-fi or something like that, but he was creating beats and stuff like that. So he definitely like stuck with it. And then two of the other guys are like DJs now, not like full time or anything, but just as sort of side hobbies. And I would be like you said, the thing that I would be inclined to get back into would actually just be rapping. I think I've probably sort of hesitated or resisted. I mean, everything has an opportunity cost on your time, and I guess I've just had a hard time like convincing myself to like take the time and like actually go and rap. Like it feels a little like silly or immature or something. But if I was, as a betting man, I would say I am much more likely to record more rap songs over the course of the rest of my life than I am to not do anymore. I don't know when that will be, but
Yeah.
it's a great activity. It's hard. It's like it's a product like not productive is the wrong word, but it's like, maybe rap gets kind of a bad rap, but it's actually like kind of hard, very creative. It's really hard actually. It's really creative. I think it's one of these things like I said with coaching. It's like if you have experience freestyling, that will actually translate to like a bunch of things. Like you might be more able to improvise in like other areas of life, or just like more creative generally with how you think about words. You might become a better writer. You might become a
Yeah.
better orator. Like all of these things. Um, so I just love these sort of like if something's interesting to you and you enjoy it, at least try it, and maybe just keep it around or do it when you can because it's just like I think all of these things sort of like feed off feed off of one another. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's also one of those things that people consider silly in their late 20s, 30s. If you're still rapping, it's a creative pursuit that, if a lot of people hear about it, they're just like, dude, like this dude's fucking 36 and he's freestyle rapping in his free time. Like, what the fuck? But you wouldn't say that about any other creative pursuit that
Yeah.
required you to write. If someone wrote a book at 36, or if someone just kept a journal, if someone started painting freestyle, you wouldn't be like, dude, this dude's fucking painting at 42 years old. Like, get a fucking life. Like,
Right.
for some reason, and I even feel this when I do it, or when I was doing it 27, 28, that it does feel like a silly thing to be doing it at a certain age. But I think
Yeah.
that's also just social conditioning that we've put rap as an art in this box that is only a young man's game. It's like a SoundCloud rapper, Lil Xan teenage thing that like you do as a silly thing in high school, and then you never do it again unless you're making a career out of it. Then it's, even then, like people make fun of rappers that are, rapping in
Right.
their 30s, 40s, 50s. But for some
Yeah.
reason, it's an art form that it's almost like ageist. It's like ageism against an art form.
Yeah. We've, I was using the word silly and then you were using the word silly. I think actually like a better word might even be like juvenile, which implies like sort of
Mm,
that youth
yeah.
thing. And it like sort of you make a great point, and actually, like talking about it makes me more inclined to get back into it. I just like I said, I'm like pretty busy right now, and like that, people are always busy. There's always excuses. You
Yeah.
really have to prioritize something. But the other thing is sort of a general, interesting principle I've sort of come across. Might sound kind of obvious, but um, something I've gotten sort of benefit from is you do something once, and you're much more likely to continue it. But if you think about it as starting a new habit or starting to do something with the intention of doing it more, you're much less likely to do it. So like
Mm,
really you have to sort of like what I should really do is be like I'm going to record one rap song this week regardless, like I don't care about anything. There's no excuses, like I'm gonna do it. And then like if I actually, stand by that and say that to myself and actually am of my word and do it, then like I can leave it at that. But most likely I will record more.
Mm.
Because like just doing it the one time, it's almost like how like you break a streak. That's like this big powerful thing. Like you break a streak and it's like over and it's like much harder to do
Yeah.
after that. Like you're not just gonna go and start another
Yeah, like a
200-day streak.
meditation streak or like a
Exactly.
babble streak or something. Yeah.
Exactly. It's sort of like it's like the opposite of that. It's like you break a streak of not having done something in forever or not having done something ever. And then it's much easier to continue to break that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And that means like basically doing it.
Yeah, like don't project your future rap career in your head. Don't record one rap and then be like, "Oh my god, like what if this goes viral?" Then all of a sudden do I have enough to quit my job? I'm doing TikTok dances. I'm drill rapping. People are shooting up my fucking house in Brooklyn like I haven't even recorded a rap yet. And you're just like projecting all these future things onto you rather than just doing one thing and then just doing it again when you feel like doing it.
Yeah, I'm like even now, as convinced as I am, I'm just short of saying like I will do it this week just because I have other, I can't really prioritize it, but I do at least have it more present in my like even talking about it helps. It's more present for both of us in our
Yeah.
minds. Like the grooves in our brains have been sort of like primed that if either of us have free time in like the next week, we would be more inclined to rap than or write lyrics or whatever than we otherwise would have been not for this conversation.
Well, let's make a deal. Whenever we decide to record our next rap, whoever does it first, that person will send it to the other person, and then when that person wants to make time to do it, they can send a rap back or respond to it or how whatever you want.
Yeah, I respect the proposal. What's our timeline? What are we
Not to
talking?
be shared publicly.
Sure,
And
yeah, of course, that's implied.
literally the next 6 months if you want to record a rap.
Okay, so basically you're saying if one person sends it, the other person's due?
Yeah, but it's not you send it back, then it has to be like a response the next day, like Kendrick
Right,
Drake.
right.
I could take six
But
months
you're
to send
due.
you a rap, and then you could send me one 4 months later.
Right. But so it's there's no time pressure, but one person, if they do it, will send it, and then the other person is generally due.
Yes,
Okay, yeah, I'm good with that. And we'll keep them private.
I exactly. And also, I have another deal for you. If you remember the hardest line or just a line in general from any of your recordings, I will share with you a verse that I recorded during COVID. I pulled one up just to look at my old fucking cringy rap writing. If you have something that you remember, I'll share you something of mine.
Like on the air here, like you would play your thing
No, I'm
or
just gonna
just
read it. I'm just gonna read you the verse.
okay. On the air though.
Yes.
Okay. It's intriguing and it's incentivizing for me to think of something. It's honestly this is more if I could think of something that I like there's definitely many lines that I would share. I just it's like honestly a memory issue. Let me just give me a moment to just think.
Sure. I should have inserted an instrumental into Riverside to just play it over.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna come up with one.
I'll share you mine. I'll give you a freebie.
Okay.
So, just as some context, this is a song that I wrote at the beginning of COVID. This is called the Fuck Corona Anthem.
Hmm.
And I did it to the instrumental of Hot Girl Bummer by Black Bear. This
Hmm.
song was just going crazy at the time.
What's Black Bear's like? Does he have other songs? I think I know him. I think I like him, but I don't know that song.
He sings the one that's like fuck you and you and you
Oh
and
yeah,
you.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
Hot
yeah.
Girl Bummer.
Oh yeah. I never got super into that one. I've heard it, but there's some other stuff. I think it was earlier in his career that he had some good stuff. But anyway, go on.
So this is one of the verses I wrote. This that fuck Corona two step. All my girls gone. I'm like, who's left? Steady jerking off with lotion. Switch it up. I go slow motion. Out of options, but I'm always in the game like Danny Ocean. This ain't fair. I'm pulling up with my Louis mask heartbroken.
That's good. It's I like the flow, and that's honestly those lyrics are more unshareable in my book than anything that I probably wrote.
Yeah.
So that's I respect, doing it live and yeah, I mean, I think we should get back into it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my SoundCloud. I'm pretty sure I've had people send me my SoundCloud that have listened to the podcast and been like, is this you?" Because I didn't realize I had the Facebook profile picture was my SoundCloud profile picture. So now I'm like,
Hmm.
well, it doesn't matter. People can just listen to it.
Is it Oxoro or is it
It's
something else?
it's just Zach, Zach, and there's probably a ton that come up. Um, but yeah, I can send it to you after if you want to hear my cringy COVID raps.
No, it's great. I just again respect the share because like what I could really do is go through and there's certain songs that are even in my like pretty high standard clean enough that the whole song is just like good to go.
Yeah.
I just haven't even gone through and like it's like, I would almost need to like redact, not like go through and like change stuff, but just like go through with that mindset and be like, okay, this song is cool. This song is not cool. And I just literally haven't done that. But if I did that, I'd be more inclined. I could probably find at least one or like three songs that are like totally clean. And not clean in terms of like not cursing, but just like clean in terms of like I'm good to share them.
Yeah.
And I could probably do that at some point. And I think it'd be nice. I respect people who do all sorts of different things. Don't sort of put themselves in a box and operate in that box for their whole life. And so I know if I was looking at myself from afar, I would respect putting out a rap song.
Yeah. I wanna get into base colors before we end off, and I feel like the rap transition is perfect because now I'm imagining you releasing a rap diss album that is going at other NFT founders, and you are doing it as base colors. And I mean, I think that would just be a great way to promote what you're doing. But to give people context, you started a project called Base Colors, which is an NFT collection for every color on the internet, and you were gracious enough to gift me color 252122, which is safely in my NFT wallet. What is the value of owning a color? Why start Base Colors?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different angles I could take here, and I'm like super deep. Like this conversation has been a nice, respite from thinking about colors all day long. And not that that's a bad thing. I'm having a great time,
Do you
but
think in
I'm
colors now? You have the thing that Billie Eilish has where she just like assigns a color or a number to everything.
I don't know what that is, but I probably don't have that thing.
I think
But like
synesthesia, I think, is the name for it.
oh no, yeah, no, I haven't like acquired any sort of, special like
The
brain like
first the
thing.
first self-induced case of synesthesia from staring at colors all day.
No, I will say like I definitely have like a bit of a greater appreciation for colors and they're certainly on my mind like a lot more, but I'm not like, hearing a guitar and translating it into color codes or something like that. But so sort of an introduction for people who don't I mean, you gave it the introduction. It's an NFT collection for every color on the internet, more broadly, every digital color. And so what that means is if you've ever, used like a color picker on the internet or on your computer or like, if you've seen a hex code, like you mentioned yours, it's a 6-digit code with 6 digits. It's not 1 through 9. It's not 0 through 9 digits. It's 0 through 9, but also A, B, C, D, E, and F are digits. So it's
Mhm.
like a 16-digit system. It's called a hexadecimal system. And so there's basically 6 different digits with 16 possibilities. And that makes it so that there are 16,777. I've been saying this all along. It's the first time I've stumbled. 16,777,216 possible colors, like sort of in this digital world. This is like
Yeah.
this universally accepted system for digital colors, basically. And so it's huge. There's like 16 million of them. And what we did with this NFT collection is we made every one of them, available as a one of one NFT. So if you go like, so pure black in color code is 000000. And if you were to be able to go and to buy that, you can't now because someone has it. But if you went and bought that, as I sort of just alluded to, no one else can get that. There's only one of every color. And so if you have a color that's important to you, whether it's like the color of your company that you're, starting, or the color of your college, or just like this shade of a color that you've been using on your personal blog for a long time, or a color from, this avatar that you have in your profile picture, or any number of things, a company color of a company that you like, Coke Red, or, Tiffany Blue, or whatever it might be. Any color that's meaningful. And a lot of people, it's been surprising to me because I've always had this blue profile picture. It's just a single color. And there's also, I use a blue dot for my podcast
Mm.
and for my blog as my logo. And so this is very serendipitous that I'm sort of working on this company. I obviously had no idea that I was going to do this when I chose that back in the day. But I've had this single color sort of logo for a very long time, and it happens to be pure blue. It's 0000FF.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, I have a color that's meaningful to me, and I can think of others as well. If you ask me, like, what are some meaningful colors like that you would consider valuable, I'd be like, well, if I was just a stranger to this project, I'd probably go in and I'd be like, well, I'm obviously going to get my blue. I would obviously like to get any primary colors that I can with like cool, very simple hex codes. So like if black is 000000 and white is FFFFFF, any combination of like zeros and Fs would be cool. And it turns out that's like what pure blue is. Like I mentioned, pure red is FF0000. You can get like yellow and fuchsia, and there's sort of like these pure, primary colors as they call them. There's 16 of those. So I would consider those to be like, highly valuable or whatever. And then in terms of like meaningful ones to me, it would be like, well, I would go for like, I'm a big Jets fan. I would go for like Jets green. I'd maybe get my university
Mm.
colors. I would probably go and try to get like Bitcoin orange. Like there's a fair number of colors. Coke red was another one that I mentioned earlier that comes to mind for me. So there's like a fair number of these, but I thought, my profile picture example, my sort of online logo, this blue, it's sort of unusual that I'm so closely connected with this color. So I didn't know that the same would be true for other people. But as it turns out, everyone has colors that they care about. Um, Everyone has
Yeah.
colors that are sort of like meaningful to them, at least a few. And so it's been really cool. So this is sort of this project that, unlike most things in crypto, it's appealing and understandable and accessible to everyone. Not everyone, like some of these crypto, NFT projects, it's like, there's the big apes collection, which bored apes, which some people might have seen. And it's like, that's a very specific vibe. And then like they have these offshoot collections. It's like mutant bored apes. And it's like mutant bored apes are only going to apply to like a very specific sort of niche of people. Like that's
Mhm.
not, for everyone. Colors are actually for everyone. And so we've sort of taken it as like sort of our responsibility to also make the experience as accessible for everyone as possible and affordable for everyone as possible. So it's $3 or so for a color. It's based on the price of Ethereum, but roughly it's like $3 a color. It'll fluctuate with the price of Ethereum. Like right now it's a little less than $3. When we launched, it was a little more. Um, so that's affordable for everyone in the world, basically, to get one color. Might be expensive for some people and might be dirt cheap for others, but it's $3 is like a
Mhm.
reasonable level. 30 I would consider to be too expensive for a lot of people. And 30 cents, for a number of reasons, didn't make sense either. It's too low to pay with a credit card. We enable paying with credit card for that other reason I mentioned, to make it as an accessible experience as possible. So that you don't have to go and separately buy crypto in order to do this other thing of get this NFT. You just pay with credit card. We're sort of leveraging these new advances that our timing is just very fortunate, where there's been like better wallet technology from Coinbase in particular that we're using, that allows people to create a crypto wallet in like 5 or 10 seconds, just using Face ID like you used to open your phone. None of this complicated stuff that used to be required to create a crypto wallet.
Yeah, I think I did it
So
in literally like 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's super easy. It's my, my sort of threshold is like, is it easy enough that like my parents can do it? Like my
Hmm.
parents are, smart people, but like not particularly tech savvy, and like they can go create a wallet, they can go mint a color or buy a color. And then the other things that, I sort of mentioned, there's one of every color. Also, the other sort of core feature is you can name your colors when only the owner can name the color. But if you own a
Mm.
color, you can then name it. And if you own a color and you can name it and then you can send it to someone else as like a gift, and then they would have the opportunity to name it. It keeps its name by default, the one that you gave it when you gifted it to them. But the power to rename it goes away from you and goes to them because they're the owner now. And that's like one of these cool things about crypto.
Mm.
Like you can do stuff like that. And so every name is also one of one and unique. And so if I go and get, I mentioned earlier, I got my blue 0000FF, and I actually named it just blue. So BLUE. And no one else can do that. Like someone can go and name it light blue, or like blue with two B's, or blue with a three instead of an E, or something like that, but they can't name it blue. And so there's like sort of this, you can ascribe value to the color. You can ascribe value to the name, like the color if it's like, Coke red, the
Hmm.
name if it's Coke for that Coke red. Um, or like you can just have a random shade of pink and it's not really special for any particular reason. But if you get that pink and you name it bubblegum, that's probably going to be like, at least from my perspective, that should be more valuable than another shade of pink that's just as random as the first one. But the name is like bubblegum 639. Like
Got
bubblegum
it.
is way better than bubblegum 639 as a name.
Yeah. So is
And
your I just wanted to say is your goal for people to treat the colors as like a collector's item, like people
yeah,
would collect watches or
exactly.
cards, like whatever it is, people will, like, you're not necessarily buying the color to the point where you're limiting other people's uses of the color,
No,
like the Jets won't have to,
no, no.
like there's no like ownership over the actual color outside of the base color system, but it's more of uh like it is like a flex. It's like I own the color blue, like I own the color black, like that.
Yeah.
It's a cool, that's your desired goal, is for people to treat it as such.
Exactly. And it's exactly what you said. It's a collectible. We're not doing anything that you're, as you were sort of saying that we're not doing, which is like would be sort of taxing on people who don't owe us any tax for any reason. It's like I'm not going to like all of a sudden like, hey Jets, like, I own your color now, so you
Yeah.
like owe me money. Like that's like ridiculous. Like we're not doing anything like that. Um and a good analogy is well, so there's a few different things I want to say on that, but to your point, fundamentally, they're digital collectibles. And what's interesting is that the value of digital collectibles is a good analogy actually for NFTs overall. Um, and like most NFTs are just kind of silly to me. Not all, but I think, I could go into it, but I think a good chunk of them are, I don't really, if I'm getting them, it's basically just to support the person who's selling them as like a small little donation in exchange for this little thing. And also I have this sort of thing that shows that I made that donation. And it's not such a donation, it really it's a purchase, but it's more just like supporting the person than it is I actually think this thing's going to go up in value. Unlike, a Bitcoin where, I'm not holding that to support anyone. I'm holding that because I think it's going to go up in value and I
Yeah.
believe in it in a lot of ways and everything like that. Um, and so, um, fair to think of NFTs as digital collectibles. And people say, well, like, oh, it's so stupid. Like, it's just a JPEG. But like, no one says that about, baseball cards. Like, it's just a piece of cardboard. But you have, some of the most, rare baseball cards of all time have sold for literally millions of dollars, or at least hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands for, you know, thousands of different baseball cards. Because the most valuable you could consider an outlier or whatever. But like, these things are valuable and they're just printed on pieces of cardboard created by a company called like Tops or whatever. It's not like Tops doesn't own, Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa. They just got the like licensing or whatever from MLB, or I don't know how it all works actually, but they printed the collection and it's like, well, everyone respects the Tops collection. There's like a few other brands of cards or whatever. And like, those are the collections and these are the most rare cards. And And, so it goes. This is how it goes with collectibles. People, like you said, it's like a status symbol. It's like the Rolex, I say like the $50,000 Rolex doesn't tell time any better than the $50 Timex. It's just a status symbol.
Mm.
Maybe the materials are like, a bit more valuable or whatever, but it's not $50,000 more valuable. It's you're paying for the Rolex brand and the logo and everything like that.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
those Balenciaga tape, uh, what do you call them? I'm blanking out. What do you put on your wrist? Uh,
like a wristband.
I guess like a wristband. It's literally like a roll of tape that goes around your wrist, and it says Balenciaga, but it looks like a roll of masking tape. But it's $3,000. So it's like people like you're buying something, um, like people are buying things for other than the functionality
Exactly.
uh that comes with it. You're doing it, for many reasons. One of those being I want to be seen as a type of person who owns this, or maybe it has a sentimental value, or maybe whatever it is, but it's not the function of it.
Yeah, and so this, the sort of function that you're talking about in the NFT world, people talk about this as like utility. Like, what's the utility is like the big question that everyone's always asking. And a lot of these projects that were successful in the NFT space they feel like sort of this pressure to like come up with an answer for that. Like, just being a collectible, like, there's not really a utility for a baseball card, right? But
Yeah.
people feel a pressure to come up with an answer. And so they go and they try to build this like, a common answer a couple of years ago was like, well, we're going to build a metaverse, and then you can use that character on that NFT as like that'll be your character in the metaverse or something. And you, first of all, you can join the metaverse in the first place because you have one, and then when you're in there, you can use your character that you bought. It's like, okay, cool, and that's great, but that's like hard to build, takes a long time, very expensive. So from day one, I've said like, I'm not promising any utility here. There may or may not be. That's up to you. I think enjoying something in and of itself is a utility to some extent. But I'm not here to like sort of debate the word utility or the definition of it. And I'm not here to disappoint people or promise things that we're not going to deliver. So from day one, I said like, not going to promise any utility, not going to share any, roadmap or set any like big expectations. It just is what it is. It's one NFT for every digital color, and every one of them has a one of one name. And I think that's interesting, and I think that's cool, and I wanted to make it. And if you want to get one, you can go get one, and you can name it, and you can get a bunch, and you can name a bunch, and you can gift them to friends, and you can do whatever you want to do. And what's been interesting is that since we started, first of all, people really dug it. Like, I knew I liked it, but that didn't mean everyone else was going to. And the enthusiasm was really high, and like, not just like, oh, this is cool, but like, really, like, I could, when you read like a really strong Airbnb review, it sort of differentiates itself from like a regular Airbnb review, or maybe the
Mm.
same is true for like restaurants or something too. But like, I noticed it particularly on Airbnb. You're like, they're like, in their review, they're like, man, this place was exceptional. This is like one of the best weekends I've ever had in my entire life. Like, I could not imagine a more beautiful property. And the town was just like
Yeah,
delightful,
yeah.
or
It's
like
like the
whatever.
comment that seals the deal in your mind. You're like, all right,
Exactly.
we're staying here.
Exactly. And it's like much different than like, this was a good, clean place. I'm glad I stayed here.
Hmm.
That's like good. It's all positive. All the words are great, but it's not like going above and beyond. And so, anyway, this like anecdotally, my read of the sort of subjective response to our launch and, subsequently stuff that we've done since has been like that sort of next level of like people are like feeling this like emotionally. And I sort of realized like it's because colors actually are meaningful. Like, we sort of live in this world where people are like, a lot of people feel this sort of like absence of meaning. And I'm not saying like, this thing's gonna like solve all your life problems, but it's nice to have a little like insert a little dose of meaning into your day, like once in a while. If you can, receive a color as a gift that was, personally selected for you and named for you from a friend, or if you can do that for a friend and send it to a friend, or just getting one for yourself that just feels good to get and it costs $3. It's like, how much of a good feeling is $3 worth? Like
Yeah.
$3, for you and me, like, you know, we're in America, whatever, like good jobs, whatever. Um, $3 is like, it's less than a cup of coffee. It's like you don't need that. Well, I shouldn't get back into the
Yeah.
coffee talk, but
Come full circle.
yeah, exactly. But
What you were saying, it makes me think about. I don't know why, but this just popped into my head as a possible advertisement for base colors. Have you seen those videos of people who are colorblind, but then they put the glasses on and they can see color for the first time?
I haven't, but I should look into that. Great.
YouTube just colorblind people seeing color, and a ton will pop up.
I'm
But
writing it down.
it's like a very emotional thing where people are just like, holy shit, I've never seen grass this vibrant. I'm looking at the color in people's eyes, and you were talking about the emotions of it. You could have a person just sitting in their apartment. It's kind of drab. Things are gray, looking bleak, and then they put on the base color glasses, and then they're just like seeing all the different NFT colors across their apartment marked, and it's like their apartment's coming to life.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would actually translate, but that the image of someone seeing color for the first time, and you talking about the emotion, just made me think of like that connection of people who haven't seen color and are seing it. But like,
Yeah,
even as someone who can see color, you're right, we do discount like how many people, if you ask them what color shirt they were wearing yesterday, they wouldn't even be able to tell you, because like you don't even clock it. Like it's like you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I was wearing a yellow shirt for 18 hours yesterday. It's just like sort of a thing that lurks in the background.
Right. Well, and so let me, so two things. One, appreciate that recommendation. I have thought of like ads that like it turns from like a black and white to a color, or like, like basically black and white TV to color TV or something. And like that's interesting. And I need like a video guy to like do that basically. But something that I don't need anyone to do is look up one of these videos you said. And I'm just going to like look that up and share it. I think people will like that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing though is like to your point, colors, they're so fundamental and so important, and people like them. Like the closest thing I can think of to colors is music. Again, we're kind of plugging into different pieces of the conversation here, but like, I feel like in trying to sort of advertise or market base colors, it's almost like my job is to, like sell music, as like not a particular album or something, but like music in general. I'm selling colors in general. I'm selling music in general. Like these are things that people just like. Like it's impossibly is maybe not the best word, but like it's so easy, because people love music and people love colors. And to your point, like kind of like music almost in a way, a little bit departing from that analogy here, but like colors are just so baked in, you don't even clock it, like you said. And what's interesting is that that's true in the physical world, like you said with your t-shirt. You don't remember what t-shirt you wore yesterday. It's also true in the digital world. Like literally everything has color, right? And so what's interesting is that even though I said like upfront, like no promises of utility or anything, right off the bat, like we've had examples of people building things in crypto that leverage base colors. And so I'll give you an example of that. So have you ever heard of CryptoPunks? Did we mention that earlier?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So CryptoPunks is like the most well-known, or maybe not most well-known. Bored Apes is also up there, but one of the few most well-known NFT projects of all time, the most valuable sort of like profile picture collection of all time. And most of that's because it was one of the first NFT collections of all time, sort of the first to really make it, I would say. And for context, the cheapest one you can buy right now is like $70,000 or $80,000. And when NFTs were super hot, a few years ago, they're sort of in like a downswing right now, which happens to be kind of like a nice time to like build something new. But a few years ago when they were like really hot, I don't think you could get one for less than like $400,000. One of these CryptoPunks, there's like 10,000 of them. And so what someone did, it was actually my idea. I put it out there as sort of like a bounty. Like if you build this, I will help a little bit and I will pay you, I think I said $500 to do it. And you can also keep the revenue from people buying them, buying the collection. I just want to see this thing built and I don't want to build it myself. I'm focused on base colors, like the core thing. And so someone picked it up, great guy, his name's Mike. And he built this collection where, and I sort of like helped sort of give feedback here and there and iterate a little bit, but he basically built this collection that, it was 1,000 punks, We call them color punks. So it's sort of like a remix on the original CryptoPunks collection. And what happened was you mint them. Mint, by the way, for people who aren't into crypto, basically just means buy.
Mm.
If there's a little nuance on it, it's like the piece that the thing that you're buying, the NFT or the art piece or whatever you want to call it, didn't really like exist until you minted it, in a sense. Like you're minting it, quote unquote, is not just buying something that exists, but it can also involve the creation of that thing in the first place.
Yeah.
And so
Like bringing
anyway,
it to life.
exactly. So like nuances aside, there's 1,000 available to buy from the start. And it actually and so what happened was they were different color punks, quote unquote, just like crypto punks. The difference was they were black and white at when you bought them, and you can color them in after you buy them with base colors that you own, and then you can sort of save them, like, and it's all of this is happening like sort of on the blockchain, like sort of being set in stone in crypto land, so to speak. And so people would buy these black and white punks, then color them in with the base colors that they own, and you have that creative freedom. It's like everyone suddenly becomes the artist. You're
Mm.
not just buying art from some artist; you are the artist now.
Yeah, it's like a collective art form.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool, and we've since had some other interesting collaborations like that. And another one that I'm still kind of waiting to see come to fruition is like any company, all of this stuff. Like this wouldn't make sense for companies that aren't doing anything in crypto to really do. What it makes sense for is companies that are building on base, which
Mm.
is base is, if you've heard, so Bitcoin's like the most popular, well-known cryptocurrency that there is. Ethereum is number two, and the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum is basically Bitcoin is digital gold, whereas and so basically you're just kind of like holding it. Most people disagree, but like my view is like you're just kind of like hold it. It's basically gold, but for the
Mhm.
digital world, and that's super important and super valuable. Um, Ethereum is something that you can actually sort of like build on top of. It's sort of like a general purpose blockchain where you can like sort of do stuff. It could be the foundation for like sort of the next, like the new and future version of an internet, basically. Could be like
Mm.
sort of a better foundation for that. And so um, the problem with Ethereum is it's relatively slow and relatively expensive. And it depends on the time, how slow and expensive it is, especially how expensive it is. But like it can be, $40 to as a transaction fee to buy an
Oh, wow.
NFT or something. And so it makes no sense, for example, this is why I said we're a little bit fortunate with timing. It makes no sense to have, and that's sort of the case for some of these older, Bored Apes collections or whatever. It cost, anywhere between a few bucks and $100 of a transaction fee to buy one of these things. And so it makes sense, like these collections were limited supply, 1,000 of them, 10,000 of them, whatever. And if they do well, very high prices, because that's the only thing that makes the transaction fees make sense. You would never
Mhm.
pay $40 transaction fee for a $3 NFT.
Yeah.
So why we're fortunate on timing is that this concept of layer twos is relatively new within the last few years, I would say, at least popularized within the last few years. And there's been a few of them. And what layer twos do is they build on top of Ethereum, sort of like a blockchain, like kind of on top of Ethereum, you can think of it as, that is faster and cheaper. And so Base is one of them. It was sort of incubated from within Coinbase, which is, biggest crypto company in the US, top two in the world, arguably number one.
Mm.
And Base, compared to the other L2s, first of all, it's sort of working collaboratively with these other L2s. And second of all, its momentum, it's just sort of like gotten way further in its first year. It's like almost exactly a year old right now. It's gotten way further than any of the others did in their first year. And even in like absolute terms, even though the other ones have been around longer, it's arguably number one, like sort of on all metrics already. So I
Wow.
think it's a really good horse to bet on. A ton of people are building on it, and we've built the color collections on Base. And that's the only other place that I think could have made sense to build it would have been on Solana, which is at the Ethereum or Bitcoin level in terms of like it's the layer one blockchain, but it's built to be faster and cheaper from the start. But there's certain like other trade-offs with it, and like I'm hoping that like I want crypto to win generally, so I'm not like I don't really want to choose a horse in the race. Like I'm invested in Solana and Ethereum and Bitcoin,
Mhm.
um, But the one that I believe most is worth building on, the best bet to build on right now from my perspective, and this has been my perspective for, several months, is base. And so that's why we made that
Mm,
choice. And then there's a ton of people building on base. And for any of those people, this is sort of a long-winded way of getting to where I wanted to end up, which is like anyone building on base can very easily integrate base colors with what they're doing to the point where like if you're building a simple app of any kind, you can give the user the ability to like customize their app experience with base colors that they own. They can change like the background color or the text color or whatever they want. And these are like,
mm,
maybe not the most important things ever, but it's nice and people enjoy it. There was like an app that a social app that went viral recently just for basically allowing people to configure the colors of their profile. And when you add in like not just that it's color configurability or customization, but you're actually using this like sort of on-chain collection that at this point has sort of built at least a bit of a brand reputation in the right circles. That becomes like a really cool thing where you start to understand how crypto, like one of its core sort of things that makes it interesting is that it's like everything is interoperable. People can like sort of pick up your project and integrate it with their project. And
mm.
colors is like the most interoperable thing ever because it's everywhere. So anyway, a little bit of a long rant, but I think it's just like to me, as someone who wasn't even really all that interested in NFTs, like I sort of gave the benefit of the doubt that NFTs would be very useful in certain capacities and some collections would, prove to be very valuable over a long period of time. I generally just like wasn't that interested. But I had this idea to do it with digital colors, like this very fundamental collection with certain characteristics that are very different. There's 16 million of them instead of 10,000 of them. That means the price needs to be lower. That means you have to do it on base instead of, you can't do it on Ethereum. Like there's these certain things, and then you give them all one of one names. That was like sort of a really good add on that came after I had the first initial idea. So I just feel really, really good about the foundation of this project as something that's fundamentally interesting, extremely interoperable, accessible, um, from like a UX, like user experience perspective, affordable from a price perspective, and sort of universally appealing as a subject because it's just colors.
Yeah.
So like that's, there's a lot of things there, a lot of reasons as you can sort of tell that I'm just like super excited about it and it's been a ton of fun building.
Yeah, no, for sure. The ease of integration, the universality, the interoperableness. I just learned a new word that can help me sound smart. But like that all seems very important for something to catch on to something that like people are gonna be using at a global level is like the everything you mentioned, the price, universality, the integration, everything that goes along with the ease of using base colors. I just wanted to go back to the music part that you mentioned as we end off because I know we're going over time. Um, but I'll just mention this quick. You said that you're making base colors, and it feels like you're making music or like you're selling music to people. I think that's a really good way to think about it because if you think from a music standpoint, I'm at a concert with someone and Beyonce's on stage and she's singing If I Were a Boy, and I look to the person I'm with him and I'm like, I own the masters to that song. Like I own, like, she is singing it and anyone can listen to it, but I own the masters. And I mean, that's pretty fucking cool to be able to say. If I was with that same person, it's almost like with base colors, the example would be, you're walking through the Louvre and you see the Mona Lisa and you turn to your friend and you say, you see those colors in the Mona Lisa? I own those colors. Like I have the masters to those colors.
Mm.
And maybe I'm mixing up the meaning of those from base colors to music, but that's just how it popped into my head. Is that kind of like the comparison you were trying to make?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting actually. I was just more so speaking to the level of sort of fundamentalness, if that's a word, to them,
Yeah.
and just the broad appeal. Like, if you try to think of things that are just universally positive, people don't really think about colors because they're just so
Hmm.
everywhere, basically. But music is one that people think about more, and everyone just kind of acknowledges. Like, you might not like all types of music or various types of music. You might not even like most types of music, but there's probably some music that you like. Like, you don't really run into people that are like I hate music. Like
Mm,
that's kind of crazy. So and a very small population of people, I would imagine. So like in terms of things that are as universally considered positive, basically, and enjoyed, that's sort of the connection I was making. But to your point, um, I actually hadn't thought about that in particular. Like I mentioned, sort of being able to change the colors in a piece of art or on a website or whatever. But it's interesting, even without doing that, if you could just get projects to sort of list the colors used, which is already like you see, companies have their logo packs, or like
mhm,
their brand assets or whatever, and they show the hex codes and stuff like that. And so maybe in like sort of the crypto world, whether it's for a company website with their brand colors or for an art project, you could imagine sort of like a credits sort of section where it lists the colors, and then it could also list the name of the colors as given by their owners and
mm,
potentially the address of the owners. And there's the typical Ethereum address, which is like the owner wallet address, is like 40. They're actually the same characters used for the color codes. So it's like 0 through 9, A through F. Starts with a 0x though. And it's 42 characters. So 0x and then 40 of these sort of hex digits. So it's kind of a mess. But people, there's these naming systems that have emerged within crypto. So they're more human readable now. So you can imagine like there's this piece of art or something, and then on the side of it, like let's say the piece uses like 5 colors. Um, these 5 colors will be listed in terms of their hex codes, and then their color names, and then which obviously is all like very legible. And then the owners would be like, for me, it could be like Jake.eth or
mm,
Oxoro.eth, and they're very human readable sort of names now that you can use to replace the sort of ugly, not meaningful Ethereum address. Nothing against Ethereum addresses. So that's really interesting. It's sort of like attribution, and it's again, it just plays
yeah,
back into this sort of like status game. And I generally like status kind of comes off with like a negative connotation, and frankly, I don't really play. I don't play the Rolex game. Like I have friends who play the Rolex game. It's not really interested. Like I'd rather just have the money. But I don't know. This is a fun game for me, and like it's an affordable status game, right? It's like you don't have to pay a
yeah,
bazillion dollars to play. You just get a few colors that are like meaningful to you, or one color that's meaningful to you. And I've really enjoyed gifting them. I've mentioned it a couple times, but it's just because I've really enjoyed it. It's like
yeah,
you'd be shocked. Like it's hard to find a gift that costs $3 that can be as pleasant to send and receive as these digital colors. And the reason is because they're personalizable, both on the color selection and the naming of it. The naming of it's key. I don't think I'm really glad we came up with that, because if it didn't have a name, like sending a random shade of green to someone, might not make that big of a deal. But for
yeah,
example, like I send that same shade of green to my buddy who's from Cape Cod, and I name it Cape Cod. Suddenly that's super cool because no one else can get the color name Cape Cod. And he's got this green
yeah,
that sort of resembles Cape Cod, or maybe it's from like the Cape Cod website, or like a picture of a map of Cape Cod or something like that. So it's like a little bit of a special green or something. And then it's named Cape Cod. And like suddenly that's like very personal, very meaningful, and costs $3, and it's like makes both people happy. So
yeah,
I feel like I'm building something positive, and people are really enjoying it, and I'm really enjoying it. So we'll see what happens. And I just like the way I fell into it as well. It's like I've always kind of wanted to be a founder, and like I said, I tried it in a gap year in college, and always sort of figured I would do it again one day. And but I didn't want to. A lot of people, I think, start a company for the sake of starting a company. They become a founder to become a founder. And I always viewed that as kind of like a trap that was probably unlikely to succeed. So I was sort of waiting to be pulled by something that I sort of felt compelled to work
mm,
on. And this has, it started as something I sort of thought was like a weekend project or like a 1 week thing, like a short term thing. And since starting it, it's just pulled me like so hard. And it feel like if you're going to wait to be pulled by something, the risk is that you never do. And that lends itself towards the argument that you actually, being a founder for the sake of being a founder could work. And like maybe the initial idea won't be the one, but you'll pivot and you'll work it out. And just starting to start might be the move. Like I considered that for a while, but I'm really glad that I didn't. This feels like the thing that, at least more so than anything else in the last several years, this has really just pulled me in to work on it super hard. I'm working longer hours, many days and weeks than I did when I was in investment banking, which was like sort of a level that I didn't think I was going to top.
Yeah.
So it's been great, and it's been a pleasure talking about it with you. And I know we're way over on time, but exciting times and great conversation to have during these exciting times.
Yeah, well, I think, if you're going over time, it's just because we were sharing our freestyle skills with the world, or our potential for rap freestyle. And I'm not ashamed of that segment at all. I'm glad people now have a throne to come at me for sharing that cringy COVID verse.
Yeah, you can't cut it. I mean, at this point,
No.
we've referenced it. You'd have to go cut different parts of the
Oh
conversation.
no, it's staying in.
It'd be a
People
whole
people are
mess.
gonna have to take shots at the throne if they want to
Yeah.
take it out. But
Yeah.
thank you, Jake, so much for coming on the podcast. Where are the best places for people to keep up with Base Colors, the blog, your podcast? Where can people check that stuff out?
Yeah, so go to basecolors.com, base as you would spell it, colors as you would spell it.com. And where else? I've got a website, a personal website, zero, like the number not spelled out, fjake.com. So 0fjake.com. And that will link to my Twitter and my podcast and blog and anywhere else you want to go. So yeah, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure the first time around. I'm glad to be able to do it again. And I don't know what the exact time interval was between the last one and this one, but hopefully we can do it again, at least at this interval, if not sooner.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, Jake. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one, man.